COVID has changed the way that we view and analyze risk. What I'd like to do over the next 45 minutes is analyze a whole variety of risks with a focus on those involving labor and international trade, and provide you with a better understanding of what's occurred and what's likely to occur. A whole variety of factors on the horizon, again, pushing GDP up, some pushing GDP down, and we have to recognize that knowledge is today's only sustainable competitive advantage. The thing is, we don't know what the jobs of the future will be, but we do know they will require highly, highly skilled workers. So for the first time in my life, workers now are really in the driver's seat as opposed to the HR department. When you talk to CEOs, as we all know, the skills deficit is the #1 concern on their minds. What can companies do to attract more workers and retain them longer? Well, #1 is that as U.S. schools attract the world's brightest and best students. We educate them, then we send them home to compete against us. People talk about immigrants taking American jobs. Statistically, they really don't. They actually help fill the openings. When population declines, you have fewer consumers, you have fewer producers, your GDP drops, and standards of living will then follow. We need to create an environment that encourages entrepreneurs to take risks. Because when they take risks, they start new companies. And when they start new companies, they create more jobs. The opioid crisis has just destroyed rural areas and had a very negative impact on participation rates. You got a job, you hope that if you worked really, really hard, maybe in a year and a half you'd get a promotion, and maybe in 3 years you'd get an office with a window. Millennials want to know what they're going to get next Thursday. Globalization is not dead. Globalization is not dying, but globalization is evolving. I like to say globalization is like fire. It can keep you warm, cook your food, or burn your house down. And I've always argued that the benefits of trade really are not very well understood. I've had members of Congress often pull me aside and say, John, I understand that this piece of legislation is very beneficial, but it's so goddamn complicated. I can't sell that economic reality in my congressional district. We have 14 free trade agreements with 20 countries. Almost half of all our exports go to those 20 countries. What does that tell you? I looked at a study not long ago of 125 countries, and those over a period of about 14 years, those with the higher tariffs, generally had smaller surpluses. So that logic is history. That 40% of that content in that Mexican product was actually U.S. content. It could be your products going down to Mexico, being incorporated in the production, then coming back to the U.S., so on average 40%. Does that mean we should lop off 40% of the trade deficit? So big question. If you still want access to 512 million European Union consumers, are you still going to invest in the UK? GM sells more cars in China than it sells in the U.S. U.S. policy really needs to reflect the fact that U.S. companies need access to the Chinese market. When President Trump bumped up trade barriers, what does President Xi have to do to save face? Is the decoupling strategy optimal outside of sensitive high technology areas? There's a whole number of strategies I think the U.S. can employ. What happens when you pull subsidies from industry? Very often you have a higher unemployment rate. What do the Chinese fear more than anything? I mean, President Xi is walking a tightrope, which is more like a high wire act. But due to black swans, you can't entirely rely on any one country. And I remember going from West Berlin to East Berlin in March 1990, like going into a time warp. I went back into 1947. And you saw what happened and how socialism doesn't work. Extremely important, and we want to keep that middle class from shrinking. And so you don't have a vote next time around far, far left. Hello, I'm John Manzella, and this is the Manzella Report. Today's most critical challenges are impacting every American. These include the direction of globalization and Chinese relations, shifting demographics and labor shortages, and rising inequality and threats to American capitalism. Understanding these challenges, the risk they pose, and how to adapt will be necessary to survive and thrive in the years ahead. Like falling dominoes, many of these challenges impact each other. For example, the key to America's vibrant system of free market capitalism lies in our ability to innovate new products and services and deliver them to the world's consumers. This requires tax policies that incentivize entrepreneurs to take risks, and pro-trade and globalization legislation that secures access to foreign markets. But when it comes to globalization, many Americans are skeptical. The truth? We need more free trade agreements that grant U.S. producers access to the world's nearly 8 billion consumers. This empowers them to achieve economies of scale much more so than just selling America's 333 million consumers. Over the last few decades, U.S. access to Chinese suppliers and its 1.4 billion consumers has been very important for U.S. companies and workers. But today, U.S. firms that solely rely on China are incurring a great deal of risk. President Xi Jinping's willingness to defy long-established international rules and his recent threats to seize Taiwan by force continue to strain Chinese relations with the West. These factors, combined with China's support for Russia during the Ukraine war, is resulting in a partial decoupling of economies, with China, Russia, and their few friends on one side, and the U.S. and its allies on the other. It's also forcing U.S. firms to focus more on ally shoring and friend shoring and less on those deemed unreliable, essentially putting limitations on globalization. But globalization is like fire. It can cook your food, keep you warm, or burn your house down. It has tremendously benefited the U.S., but it has not impacted all of us equally and has left many behind. Globalization has been extremely beneficial to higher skilled workers engaged in lifelong learning and for companies that are highly productive or producing goods and services rich in intellectual property. However, it has presented new challenges for employees with limited skills and for less competitive companies that produce low technology goods and services. But the impact of globalization often has become confused with the impact of new technologies and automation, which are primarily responsible for job losses and could threaten nearly half of America's workforce in the next 2 decades. And those with high school degrees are significantly more likely to hold jobs that will become automated compared to those with college degrees. The good news, after waves of technology destroy jobs, many more are created. Although we don't know what the jobs of the future will be, we do know they will require highly skilled workers. The bad news, this process has led to rising income inequality between higher and lower skilled workers and is a major contributing factor responsible for eroding America's middle class. It's also an important factor resulting in rising support for populists who pretend to have the answers. Now, based on history, populists on the far left tend to implement socialist policies that significantly boost taxes and disincentivize entrepreneurs to take risks, and this results in poor growth and a declining living standard. On the other hand, populists on the far right tend to gift their friends economic benefits, ultimately resulting in an unsustainable system of crony capitalism. In both cases, capitalism is threatened. And most recently, populists have demonized immigrants when they are needed most to help fill job openings in the U.S. Now, due to shifting demographics in the U.S. and many other countries, birth rates have fallen below the replacement level of 2.1 per woman. This translates into fewer consumers and producers and can lead to a declining standard of living. Immigrants help keep America's population growing, but are not the whole solution. Shifting demographics also have tremendous consequences for U.S. labor, resulting in worker shortages and skills deficits that will only become worse as the U.S. economy expands. As a result, companies will need to invest more in new technologies and automation and implement strategies to attract and retain employees. And very importantly, workers will need to continually upgrade their skills. But unless pro-globalization policies continue to support U.S. corporate access to the world's consumers and the American middle class is strengthened through investments in education, healthcare, and other areas, our system of free market capitalism will be increasingly threatened.